Hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes. I'm just a professor trying to provide context in the war in Ukraine. Here are five big stories for today. It is Tuesday, October 29th, 2024. So the South Korean government delegation will visit Ukraine this week. During the meeting, the parties are expected to discuss the cooperation between the countries and share information about North Korean troops fighting on Russia's side. So they wouldn't have had this help except for North Korea coming to the aid of Russia. So now that North Korea is involved with Russia, what we're going to see is South Korea going to be working with Ukraine more like a hand in glove because South Korea and North Korea are somewhat more mortal enemies. Okay, with that, George Barros from the Institute for the Study of War provided an assessment of the role of North Korean soldiers, and we're going to hear this for just a minute.
Well, thank you for having me, Matthew. So in terms of the battlefield tactics, the actual combat power that these 10,000 or so North Koreans are going to provide the Russians, not actually that significant. 10,000 forces is just a very small number. The Russians suffer about 30,000 troops killed and wounded per month. So this is 1 month or 1/3 of a month's worth of losses if it's just this.
And that's historically been accurate. This month it'll be closer to 35 to 40,000 killed and wounded because of just how hard Russia has been pressing over the last month.
The other issue is I'm very skeptical of North Koreans' forces' combat effectiveness. The North Korean military hasn't actually had any real combat experience in real fought wars for over 50 years at this point. So what we're going to be seeing are North Korean units deploying to the front lines to operate with Russian units. And in fact, that might create some seams where more experienced and on the whole better cohesive Russian units will be arm to arm with the North Koreans. And that could create some opportunities for the Ukrainians to exploit vulnerabilities where those command seams exist.
As prison guards, the North Koreans are probably second to none in the world, but as far as actively fighting in combat, that's yet to be seen how that's going to go. And 10,000 truly isn't that much, even if these are supposed to be elite forces, which the Wall Street Journal said yesterday is not elite, even if they have that name, but okay, we'll see what happens there. Now, the Pentagon continues to spin the North Korean troops in Russia as a sign of desperation. Quote, Putin may be in more trouble than people realize, unquote. Now, the comment here is, I don't see how 10,000 additional troops at Russia's disposal can be seen as anything other than a bad thing for Ukraine. Yeah, 10,000 is not going to be a game changer, but you just brought in another country in on your side, and that number could escalate, and it's kind of a bad thing, even if it's not going to be detrimental. We're once again left asking, is President Biden going to do anything about this? And unless he does something about this, unless there's some very strong, not just strongly worded, full-throated endorsement, but unless something materially changes, nothing materially changes. Okay, let's turn our attention to big story number 2. We're going to look at what's going on in Georgia. There's protests against Russia stealing the elections in Tbilisi, Georgia. And this is looking very, like I saw a picture of Maidan in 2014 and Georgia right now juxtaposed, and it was really interesting to see. Now, if you're going to actually push back, now's the time because Russia doesn't have the troops to spare to send in to clamp down on this like they did in 2014. Here is Radio Free Europe talking about this. Supporters of Georgia's political opposition parties demonstrated outside their country's parliament building in Tbilisi to denounce official election results, claiming that they were rigged. Here's what was said on Radio Free Europe.
Pro-Western opposition supporters have gathered in front of the country's parliament to protest what they have called a stolen parliamentary election. Claims of vote rigging and violence mar the October 26 vote that saw the ruling Georgian Dream Party receive an outright majority of 54%. Georgia's pro-Western president had called for protests after saying she would not recognize the election results. International observers have talked about a climate of fear, intimidation, and pressure before and during the October 26 election day.
We also had seen a lot of cases where people were beaten up, people were repressed in many other ways.
I want my country to keep and stay away from Russia and keep going towards Europe.
If we, Georgian people, give up now, we can find ourselves in the darkness.
The Prime Minister from the ruling party claims that the accusations of fraud are false and that irregularities happen everywhere, in every country.
Okay, so that last line really grabbed my attention. That saying that is false, okay, but saying that this happens everywhere, it's almost like scripted out of RT, because that's what RT is trying to present all the time. They're trying to show us that, hey, this thing's bad over here, but you do it too, and you do it, and you do it, and you do it, and you do it. Like, that's the way that they focus their news efforts. Okay, so that's what's going on there. Here's the president of Georgia in an interview. 1 minute with her.
When we met you at the polling station on Saturday, you were convinced that the opposition would win. You said, tonight victory will be ours, our dreams will come true. What happened?
I was right. We won the elections. The opposition, when I say we, it's not the opposition, it's the pro-European forces who won the elections. The fact that they were stolen is a different story. The electronic equipment that was for the first time used in elections in Georgia was used to reproduce votes with one ID. You could vote 15, 17, 20 times, and that is being documented in many manners.
And what evidence do you have of this?
There are evidences. It's not me, but I've been shown the evidence.
International election observers have criticized the election. They said they witnessed cases of double voting, ballot box stuffing, of intimidation and the like, but they didn't condemn the election. They didn't say this election had been rigged, and that's a problem for you, isn't it?
No, it's not a problem, because the International Observer Mission never condemn elections 2 days after the election. They have to have still their final judgment on the election. Really, the observation is done more by locals than by these international observers that travel through the country, and it's very difficult for them to really reach to the depths. We ourselves were surprised and did not understand, so it's difficult to imagine that outsiders that do not know the country could. But
you're convinced by the evidence that you have seen that this election has been rigged.
If I had not been convinced, I would not have announced that these elections are not legitimate, that they have been stolen from the Georgian people. Very interesting to see that the only places where the election was free, limited, because people were not allowed to vote in mass, but where they were free, that is in our diaspora, 90% of the voters gave their votes to the pro-European choice.
Okay, so that's an interesting thing. If they're in the diaspora, they outside the country, 90% went one way. And so now you're going to have different opinions within, but 2 days after you don't have enough time to gather the facts. Anyone can say rigged election, but now you have to actually prove it. So here's a little bit of the proof. Georgia, on top of the electoral integrity violations reported by observers, the widespread tampering in favor of the government is visible also in detailed official results counts. Here's Europe elects was independently able to reproduce the markings of fraud. So here's the 2024 Georgia parliamentary election, and so this is for Georgia Dream and the vote share. Now, what you're looking at is rural in light, and then urban in light and rural in dark purple, just for Georgian Dream. And what you should see is the percentage of those that are voting, or the vote share, and what you should see bell curves. And a bell curve would look like this dotted line, generally speaking. I'm not a statistician. I had stats in undergrad, master's, and PhD, but you should see a bell curve that looks like this, just kind of like that. But you're seeing this weird spiky thing. What's going on there? Now, in contrast, if we want to see some contrast, here is the example of the vote distribution for the opposition Unity Party, and there shows much more like a bell curve, both urban and rural. Like, that's what it's supposed to look like. And then you see in 2020 what it actually looked like for Georgia Dream. It looked like a much more of a bell curve than whatever we saw up here. And so this is where the irregularity is taking place, and we'll hear more about this in the future moving forward, I'm sure. Now, before we go, again, This is a time, people of Georgia, to actually push back against it while Russia is occupied with their hands full in Ukraine. So you can have a protest, a Maidan-like protest, without having the same fear of the Russians actually coming in and trying to occupy that you might have had in the back of your mind before. Okay. Turning to domestic news, we are 1 week away from the U.S. presidential election. It's too close to call. I mean, I see it just fluctuate back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The Washington Post lost 200,000 subscribers in a week due to its decision not to support any of the presidential candidates. So they were expected to have endorsed Kamala Harris, and because they didn't do that, they lost 200,000 subscribers. Can you imagine what would have happened if they had endorsed Trump? How many subscribers they would have lost? Okay. Preston Stewart talks about the Joe Rogan Trump podcast, and he said it really drove home just how little foreign policy plays into electoral politics. I think this is important. It's important to understand that while this channel is totally dedicated to what's going on in Ukraine, this is not the big issue for many voters. And so they're having to wrestle with multiple other issues, including this, but international news just doesn't rank nearly as high. In a 3-hour show, Ukraine-Russia war got maybe 3 minutes of discussion, and that was almost in passing. I'm not sure Israel, Gaza, Hezbollah, Houthis, or Iran were even mentioned once. And so as he says that, I tried to watch the thing, and I could only get through about a third. I don't know what point there was the 3-minute discussion of, because I couldn't handle anymore, and I just had to like turn off and watch something funny and light and whatever. I get to a point even. Now, Michael McFaul was talking about, come on, Joe Rogan, it's the last week of the campaign. She's a little busier than you. Get on a private plane and do the interview, even if just for an hour. What's he talking about? Joe Rogan said, look, also for the record, the Harris campaign has not passed on doing the podcast. They offered a date for Tuesday, but I would have to travel to her, and they only wanted to do an hour. I strongly feel the best way to do it is in the studio in Austin. My sincere wish is to just have a nice conversation and get to know her as a human being. I really hope we can make it happen. Now, Trump, when he has a busy schedule, he went to Joe Rogan. Nevertheless, I think it's in all of our best interest for Joe Rogan to have that conversation with Kamala Harris. Even if he has to go to her, I would think the public interest is most served by actually having the conversation so that she can make her points, the public can see what she has to say and how she said it. And yeah, I mean, that's probably the best, but I don't control what's going on here. Okay, Solyov, chief propagandist here in Russia, is saying things like, if all anti-imperialist forces stand shoulder to shoulder with us, I personally will be happy about it. I believe that the NATO scum should be destroyed wherever they appear and try to continue their tradition of colonizing peoples. It's always fascinating to me that they're talking about how the West is colonizing. What you're doing in Ukraine right now is colonizing by force. In Georgia, by fraud, is colonizing by force. Okay, it's just a different type of force. One is political and one is military. All right, so I want to highlight this woman. Her name is Victoria Hurich. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. She was a Wall Street trader, and she traded that in for Ukraine's front lines. The former banker now serves as a paramedic in the Bakhmut sector. I didn't think twice about it, leaving my warm New York office to help my family and my country, she says, embodying the citizen commitment in wartime. Like, that's hardcore. Like, I do these, I spend a lot of time on it, but I'm going to sleep in my own warm bed and eat hot meals every day. But that's something. And so she deserves to be commended for that. All right, second to last thing here that I'm going to show you is this. This is the front line today. This is the front line 6 months ago. Today, near Cross, 6 months ago. And when you're seeing those high numbers daily, day over day, like 1,500, 1,600, I mean, it's been crazy. It was only 13 and change today, and that was low. It was 1,600 something the day before. Like, this is what is happening on the front lines, and that's what's causing it, is that it's gone from this to that. Okay, last little bit that I'm going to show you. This is Darth Putin, the parody site. The EU stands with Georgian people, right up to the point of actually doing something like punishing Orban for this. That's right, they're all talk. you have to actually do in order to have a credible threat. And that's kind of the point of what deterrence is actually supposed to be. I did 2 videos about deterrence over the last 2 days. Please go check those out. If you want to know more about what's going on the front lines, my very last video was talking about this with Greg Terry, so you can get some insider information about what's going on the front. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.